And thanks for once again joining us at Secular AZ. Again, feel free to put your name in the chat, in the webinar, or on our Facebook page if you're joining us on Facebook. We are a nonprofit organization focused on protecting the Constitution and the separation of church and state for over a decade. We've had great speakers. Our Friday updates, we get folks from all over the country, sometimes even all over the world, historians, authors, elected officials, journalists, you name it, and they come here. Next Friday, you can join us for a conversation with Reverend Peter Cook, who is the executive director of the New York State Council for Churches. He's working to break the bond between Christianity and guns with one simple message. It's the responsibility of white Christian denominations to challenge white America's relationship with God and guns that is intertwined with white supremacy. Oh boy, I bet all kinds of, Southern Baptist preachers just love him. You will not want to miss that. I know I don't. And also, if you're interested in getting more involved with our organization, we are looking for volunteers to help with our school board support initiative. By the way, we've got a Substack in the hopper about Peoria's meeting last night. So, be sure to check your inboxes because we're probably going to publish that today since what's going on there has gotten even worse, if you can imagine. So yeah, if you want to get more involved in that, you can do that. I'm sure Lindsay's throwing up links as we speak. She's like a ninja. And we are also in the middle of a membership drive for 2023 because our rates are going to be going up in 2024. So if you renew your membership now, you can get a fancy, handy little magnetic bumper sticker. I had my coffee cup. Oh, there's my coffee cup right there because I'm out of coffee, but we have one of these, my lid's not on it. But yeah, just a little token of our appreciation as we are going to be raising our prices too. So, but today I am really, really excited. We are speaking today with Jesenia Pizarro, a Ph.D. Professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice in Arizona State University. Her research focuses on violence, particularly lethal violence committed with firearms, the processing of violent crime in the criminal justice system, and transdisciplinary research approaches. She has worked with police departments and agencies throughout the country in joint efforts to curb violence and has managed funded grants from that focus on urban violence and intimate partner homicide prevention. If our state legislature had their way, it would be easier for abusers to get guns. She's a member of the Homicide Research Working Group and an officer of the Research Society for the Prevention of Firearm-Related Harms, and the editor-in-chief of Homicide Studies, an interdisciplinary and international journal. Wow, that is one fancy resume. Did I miss anything?
I think you got it all.
Good. Yeah, because otherwise we wouldn't have enough time to hear you actually talk about your area.
Oh my goodness.
It's so good to have you here. This is, I think, such an important topic. So I'm really grateful and I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. Yes. So Jesenia, I'm just going to hand it right over to you. Okay.
Perfect. Right. And let me start sharing my screen. Yep. And thank you for the invitation. I always like to take invitations like this because I think that our best method for prevention is through education, right? Teaching community members and teaching people who are interested in the topic, because at the end of the day, the way we're going to solve these problems is via the people. It's via the people that are going out there and doing the heavy lifting. So I'm really excited to be here. So today, and one of the things I noticed with the speaker series, I'm kind of kicking it off. So my presentation is going to be a little bit more academic. I'm going to talk a little bit about trends and what we know are some of the risk factors. And then we're going to end with a discussion of best practices for prevention. Because I know some people, it's very hard to lose faith and be fatalistic about what's going on in our country right now with firearm violence and firearm related harms. But there are actual things that can be done to help curb this problem. So, and now my screen is not moving. So let's see how I move my slide. Enter. Okay. So let me move this because now I can't see my slide. But One of the things that we know as of some of the most current statistics is that there's currently about 400 million firearms in circulation in the United States, and that some of the statistics indicate that approximately 40% of households have at least one firearm in the United States. And we know that this has increased, there was sharp increases during the COVID pandemic. Around that time, we also started seeing increases in the number of individuals who are injured fatally and non-fatally. Approximately 100,000 individuals in this country are injured with a firearm every year, and approximately 50,000 individuals are killed and lose their life. And this is a startling statistic when I found it, and then I fact checked it multiple times. But approximately 200 people are shot and injured with a firearm every day, and 120 lose their lives. So another startling statistic is that as of 2021, we reached a 28-year high in numbers of firearm related deaths, with almost 50,000, 48,000 individuals lost their life in 2021. Of these, suicides are the most prevalent, and I'm going to show you some trend statistics in a minute if my slides were to move. So as you could see here, and these are data that come from the CDC, and according to the if you start seeing 2001, we started seeing an uptick in the number of firearm related mortality, which started creeping slowly in about 2014, and then we hit an all-time high in 2021. So the green line here is all firearm mortality deaths. In this time period, since the CDC started collecting data, approximately 725,000 individuals have lost their life due to a firearm injury. So as you see in this trend here, the green are all of them. The highest would be suicides, which is the orange, and then like the red orange are homicides. And then you have things like legal interventions that these are legal interventions. I guess the best way you can describe these are things like officer involved shootings. You have unintentional deaths, which are accidents, and then you have some that are undetermined, which we're not going to get to, but it's very few. In Arizona, we see a similar uptick. The first line up here, these are the total number of deaths. The second line are suicides, and then you have your homicides in Arizona. So this trend that we have seen nationally, we have also seen in a smaller scale in Arizona, this slow creep up of firearm-related deaths. When we look at the breakdown of who's most likely affected by firearm-related deaths and injuries, we know that males comprise the bulk of these. Approximately 86% of all victims are males. We know that even though the bulk of victims are non-Hispanic whites, when you translate this into rates, we know that Black non-Hispanics and Black non-Hispanics are disproportionately affected. So they're 26% of the victims, but they're like 13% of the population. We also know that rates and vary by firearm mortality and geographic location. So we know when we're looking at suicide, and specifically middle-aged white men are more often affected by it. And we know when we're looking at incidents in rural communities, you're going to see higher rates of suicide with a firearm than when you're looking at urban environments, where you are more likely to see things like IPV, IPH, which is intimate partner violence, intimate partner homicides, and community-based violence. So there is variation. So we have this 725,000 individuals who have lost their life since 2001, but there are differences in terms of geographic location, what occurs where, and what population groups are affected by what. And that could be an entire different webinar that will take us another hour to talk about. But I'm happy to answer questions about that later. So in terms of firearms and crime, so we, as you saw from the beginning slides, you have things like unintentional deaths, you have suicides, which are not counted in the statistics. But crime specific, we know that firearms are also disproportionately used in our violent crimes. Approximately 80% of all homicides in this country are committed and carried out with a firearm. Approximately 40% of robberies and approximately 26, or if you round up 30% of assaults involve a firearm. We also know that when a firearm is present and when a firearm is used, the risk of lethality increases. That means that because of the injuries that you would sustain if a firearm is used against you in the commission of an act of a crime, you are more likely to die than if another weapon was used, or if your hands and feet were used. So just a mere presence of the use of a firearm increases the odds of lethality and deaths. And we also know, just at a broader, grander scale, that more guns equal more violence. We know that places that have higher per capita number of guns also have higher per capita number of things like homicide and crimes that are committed with a firearm. We know that areas that have higher per capita of guns also have higher rates of things like legal interventions and things like officer-involved shootings. So more guns, more violence. And also we know from some of the research that simply having a gun in your person, carrying a firearm, increases the risk of you using that firearm, which can end up in an act of lethal violence or a non-fatal firearm injury. So more guns, more violence, more guns equals you're more likely to use it. Before I delve into prevention, I think it's very important to differentiate the different types of firearm-related violence. So for this presentation, I am particularly focusing on incidents related to crime. If you recall back on one of the first slides, and I talk about the different modes of death, my concentration here is mostly homicide. Suicide, even though suicide is very important, is one of the leading causes when you talk about firearms. Those are a distinct set of covariates, a distinct set of a different etiology. So we're not really getting into that here. We're focusing more on acts of intentional lethal violence. And when we talk about these lethal violence, particularly homicides where a firearm can be broken down into three categories. The first category is the category that gets the most attention, which are incidents of mass violence, mass shootings. These types of incidents involve the injury or death of 4 or more individuals. The next category that is pretty common are intimate and intimate partner violence, intimate partner homicides, and domestic homicides, which are incidents that are committed by family members and intimate partners. And then you have your community violence, which is one of the most broadest, which is incidents involving interpersonal violence that take place in public spheres, that take place between individuals that are not immediately related. So here you will have your traditional drug type homicide or gang homicide, or an escalating dispute that turns lethal between people that generally don't know each other. And these three categories are important because they're going to inform the type of prevention strategies that we try to that we're going to be discussing later and that have shown evidence for as best practices. I think it's important to also point out before I move forward that mass violence, this is not like a motive type category. So incidents of domestic violence can be a mass violence event. In fact, I don't think a lot of people realize that most incidents of mass violence are domestic and intimate partner related. So the bulk of incidents involving multiple fatalities in the United States are family homicides and familicides, where one partner kills their partner and generally kills and also kills their children. Also, mass violence can also creep in incidents of community violence. So here you will have, what comes to mind is like a traditional gang homicide where there's a drive-by shooting and multiple people get killed. These types of mass violence incidents generally don't get as much attention as more random type, but they're also covered within these definitions of domestic and community violence. So really quick, what do we know? So if you recall from the last two previous slides, simply having a firearm in your person increases the odds that you are going to use it. Simply using a firearm increases the odds of an act of lethal violence occurring or an accident occurring. So why do people carry guns, and why do we have approximately 400 million guns out in circulation? Well, research that has been done to examine why people carry guns, the most often cited reason is protection, personal protection. People, that's the #1 reason why people carry a gun in the United States in the national surveys that have been done. And we also know, based on some of the research, what are some of the risk factors? So what increases the odds that an individual is going to carry a firearm or want a firearm or feel the need for this protection? So some of the risk factors that we know are like poor social structural conditions, community violence. So if you live in an area that has high violence rates, you're more likely to feel that you need a firearm yourself to protect yourself. In some communities, a perception of police bias also comes into place. Other risk factors for firearm carriage would be, and this is more in the community violence realm, things like substance abuse, prior violence involvement and victimization are related, and also like I mentioned before, the more firearms in a location, the more likely you're going to want to have one. So peer carriage of a firearm also increases the odds that you might want to or will try to or feel the need to have a firearm in your person. So what do you do? We talked about the grim statistics. We talked about some of the risk factors, and I think sometimes us as human, we could look at things and be like, well, I'm not going to eradicate poverty and poor social conditions. But the good thing is that research has shown different things that we can do as a community to prevent firearm-related harms and to prevent that lethality component of firearms. And here is the public health model. The public health model gives us 3 types of preventions, as you must say. And this pyramid is usually used to not deal with things like firearm violence, but this is the pyramid that's generally used to deal with things like actual diseases and things that doctors, physicians deal with. So there's 3 types of prevention that an ED at an emergency room or at a hospital, when people go in there sick, that generally we can utilize, and we are borrowing from this to look at how we prevent firearm violence. Well, one of them is primary prevention. Primary prevention are approaches that take place before any violence occurs, and they target an entire population. So here you're trying to inoculate, if you're using medical terms, you're inoculating a population. A primary prevention effort that we see now is the call for the flu vaccine. You are just trying to give everybody this medicine before the flu even comes to fruition and before they even get the flu. The second type of prevention is the immediate response, something that you can do immediately once you're dealing with a population who's at risk or who has already sustained an injury, right? So here is what do you do with this population that's at risk? So that will be secondary prevention. And here the prevention focuses on the individuals who are at the highest risk. And then tertiary prevention, which and this is just me, I sometimes think this is not really prevention, because what you're doing with tertiary is the aftermath. What happens after that disease occurred, and how do you deal with the consequences of it in the back end? So I am now going to move forward, and I'm going to give you some examples of some best practices that research have found to be promising at each of these levels. In terms of primary prevention, there's been a couple of scope and reviews that have been done and some research that have been done. And I just realized I did the mortal sin of a professor and didn't put my citation at the bottom of this. But there are citations to this. So we know that, for example, promising primary prevention efforts involve things like firearm safe storage. We know that educating individuals, educating parents, particularly in hospital settings, about how to properly store your firearm when you're home are related to decreases in child and teen suicide, for example, with a firearm, and some other interpersonal types of violence. So a lot of this, again, this is just given when it has been done, it's just do at the hospital or at your primary care physician's visit with simple questions, and just providing information to parents or individuals about how to properly store their firearms. We know also that when you couple that when giving people things like safety locks, which could be expensive, also show promising results. We also know that investing in education is very important. And that idea here is to try to, before behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs start emerging that are favorable of violence or that are favorable to react to conflict a certain way, that educating youth on things like conflict resolution, on things on how to cope with stressful situations. So these school type based interventions have also shown promise when we're talking about prevention. And I want to make a big distinction here between programs that use scare tactics and just programs that are just focused on educating. We know that being forceful or using scare tactics, for example, scared straight, are not necessarily that effective. This is more about including in your curriculum proper ways to handle conflict and behavioral types of training related to this. Another thing that is unrelated to school or with parents that is starting to show a lot of promise is greening and neighborhood beautification. We are starting to learn that if you keep residents invested and happy within their environments, there's more social cohesion, there's more people out in the community, and that this has a positive effect with actually a negative effect, which means it decreases incidents of violence, and particularly firearm violence. So looking at greening and neighborhood beautification, and also firearm safety legislation. Here we would have things that have shown promise, like what I'm thinking about with this bullet point are things like permit to purchase laws. We know that states that have permit to purchase laws have lower rates of firearm related harms. They have lower rates of homicide. So these universal like permit to purchase laws that involve things like background checks have shown so promise in the research. And these type of prevention strategies just focus on the overall population. And the goal here is to prevent something from ever even happening. So keep that in mind. What do you do once there's problems? And what do you do once there's a group, a population, or an individual, or a group of individuals that are high risk for engaging in a firearm related harm? I'm going to go back to gun safety legislation. There have been some gun safety legislations that have been found to be promising. An example of this will be domestic violence restraining orders. Domestic violence restraining orders, we have found from some of the research that states that have domestic violence restraining orders also have lower rates of intimate partner homicide. So there is a relationship here. And I start with this one because this is the one piece of policy that if you keep up with what's going on in the Supreme Court will be hearing this case in November after the 5th District Court struck down DVROs, domestic violence, that part of the domestic violence restraining order where they take the gun away from the person who is under has the DVR against them. Another gun safety legislation that has been found to be very promising are things like extreme risk protection orders. The research there is in its infancy, but some research have even found that there is a relationship with things like extreme risk protection orders and the prevention of mass casualty and mass shootings there, because there's a link there. There has been research that have found that extreme risk protection orders are a good protective factor for people who have suicidal ideation, and states with them have lower suicide rates. Other things that are very popular that have shown promise have been violence interruption and hospital-based intervention. These types of programs work with survivors of gun violence or with individuals who have been victimized or are high at risk of engaging in these types of crime, so that you can lower the risk and you can end the cycle of violence within these groups. And then one of my favorite, because there's a criminology type of approach, is focused deterrence. Focused deterrence reached its height of popularity with some of the work that came out of Boston through Operation Ceasefire. And what they did here is that criminal justice agencies collaborated with community agencies, but they also identified individuals who were high at risk of engaging in a violent crime. And what they did was, like, they targeted these individuals. They found these individuals. They told them, like, we know who you are. We're going to keep an eye on you. And the moment that we see that you actually break some of the rules, we're going to come at you with federal prosecution. So we don't want to see you carrying guns or causing problems. And it was a more focused approach, a more focused method that was done with individuals that were high at risk for offending. And then you have your tertiary prevention. I think a lot of people, so when an act of firearm violence occurs, when a suicide or an intimate partner homicide or a mass violence, there is an aftermath. So things don't end there. And so what do you do after a horrible event has happened? So this is where your tertiary prevention come into effect. Here, the one thing, making sure that you provide adequate medical care for survivors so that they could get back and integrate back into society, but also helping them get back on their feet so they don't feel like they have to go back and retaliate. Trauma-informed counseling and care is also very important. This is very relevant with children and adolescents that witness violence, particularly intimate partner violence. We know, for example, that approximately half of the victims of an act of intimate partner homicide had children. And in many of those cases, their children are the ones that find the body or they witness it. So providing counseling service, providing that care to these survivors and not forgetting it just when after the incident occurs. So going back, making these survivors healthy, which is related to service to survivors. And I put here an example of ASU's Akasi. ASU has an actual center here at Arizona State that focuses on children and adolescents who survive a parent who has been killed, and they give them services. They provide educational services, vocational service, counseling service, you name it. But the idea here is to help them stay healthy and get healthy so that that cycle of violence doesn't repeat, so that they interrupt that cycle. And of course, it will be remiss not to point out the ultimate tertiary response, which is criminal justice responses. And with these criminal justice responses, we're dealing more with the offenders and the individuals that engage in these acts. This involves detention, prosecution, and incarceration. And I know that, you know, some people will be like, well, the carceral system is bad, it causes harm and all these things. But when you're dealing with a person who has been shot or killed, sometimes giving a family that sense of justice can create peace of mind, because they won't have to worry about this person being out and coming out to get them. But also that sense of justice and creates more, I would say, more belief, more connections with the criminal justice system. And we know that the criminal justice system does not work by itself, that having that faith and having that structure from the community helps law enforcement and helps criminal justice agents better do their job. So at the end, also providing that closure and justice to to families and survivors is an important prevention method. So I want to end with a couple of organizations. If you are interested in learning more about firearm violence and firearm violence prevention, the state of science, I am a member of a national organization. We just got our 504c3 status, but I will encourage you to look into the Research Society for the Prevention of Firearm-Related Harms, sign up to the listserv, and we will be having important things coming out. And more locally, there's Arizonians for Gun Safety, for which I'm a member of and a board member of as well, where we work about, with issues surrounding firearm violence and firearm related harms at a more local level. So I gave you a lot of information. So I know there's probably a lot of questions. So I am going to stop share and I am ready to take questions and take it from there. Stop share. Okay.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. That was really informative. There was a question here, and I know it was related to one of your early slides. Let me see. I think it was somewhere. I think it was Ken. Yeah. Was it Ken? No, it was James. James asked, and I don't know again which this is in reference to, and you may have even answered. Does that number include police action? So I guess, do you account for, police?
The 725,000? Yes. Okay. That includes all firearm related deaths. And those are the legal, that's what's classified as legal interventions. You don't really see it in the trend really high because they're at the bottom. So, but yeah, so when we talk about firearm related harms, right? And we break it down by type. So the general types that are recorded by the CDC are suicide, homicide, accidental, legal interventions, which are where your officer involved shootings, and then you have the undetermined category. And this is like, just without getting too technical, these are people that were killed by a firearm, but the medical examiner and the investigation couldn't determine if this was a suicide, an accident, or a homicide. It
Okay.
was just when they did, and they generally do that after they do an autopsy.
Okay.
But those numbers are really small. But yes, so legal interventions do count in there.
I don't know if you need to answer this one. It seems like Diana already did. James asked, why has the Second Amendment part about a well-regulated militia been separated from right of the people to keep and bear arms? And Diane said, because of ideological capture and political pressure.
Yeah, and I am not a legal scholar, so I'm not here to debate or talk about the philosophical aspects of the Second Amendment. I'm here as a criminologist and that dabbles with public health. I'm here to tell you facts about the consequences of the number of firearms that are in this country, not to debate philosophically or these legal merits, because I am not qualified to do that.
Okay. And again, next week, it sounds like there will be somebody, you know, with the Reverend that's going to be joining us. So for those folks who are watching today and you want more kind of philosophical answers, I would say you definitely want to come next week at noon on Friday. You know, while you were talking too, it just made me think about, you know, because we do this school board tracking and how, you know, there's this real pushback against social emotional learning. And there was a slide that you had where it's like, that's part of the prevention. Like, we need social emotional learning for kids who are maybe traumatized by a domestic violence situation or gunfire in their neighborhood. When I worked in the Osborne School District, I remember many of my students, we had a discussion one time about how their families, because there was so much random gunfire in their neighborhoods and gun violence, and they hear gunfire all the time, they would actually have drills about dropping to the floor. And one of my students, actually, I found this out, you know, almost at the end of a school year, her brother, the family had won like a multi-million-dollar lawsuit because her brother was shot in his bedroom while there was a police action going on. So like, there are those communities. I love that you put in, you know, things like beautification and neighborhood cleanups and stuff like that, because, you know, doing that kind of stuff can change the entire kind of vibe of the neighborhood.
Yeah, it strengthens the community. It gives the community back its power. But one of the things that I always say, and you know, with this emotional type of learning and just taking care, I always throw this out, and this is just one of my favorite sayings, is easier to prevent and to put a child on the right path than to fix a broken person, a person once they have gone through the criminal justice system. So there are things that you can do before it even becomes a problem. Let's teach our children how to handle conflict. Let's teach our children and our parents about, if you're going to have a firearm, okay, it's legally right for you to do that. But what are some things that we can do to make sure that your children and that are safe with this weapon in your home, right? So this is where you have, so that those education components, I think are very important, and they're very important primary prevention. So if we really want to deal with this epidemic, which in this language, I'm not using this hyperbole here because I'm just a scaremonger, right? This is a language that is used by the American Medical Association. We're dealing with an epidemic here. We're dealing with 100,000 people getting shot every year and half of them losing their lives. There's things that you can do at the primary level that don't hinder or interfere on anybody's Second Amendment right. It's just about investing in the future, investing in our children, and investing in our communities so that problems don't emerge.
Right. And I don't know when exactly, but we are going to be having a discussion with one of the leaders of the Arizona Moms Demand Action group. And when I was on my local school board, they have like, I think it's called their smart, it's like a smart, it's an acronym for something, and it's all about safe storage of guns, and how in addition to say like the student handbook and the, you know, free and reduced lunch application and uniform, whatever things they pass out, now they pass out this safe storage, you know, kind of guidebook for families to be able to educate their children about guns and to be able to safely store their guns. Because during COVID, in that district, there was, I don't, you know, these kids were home from school. The older one was watching the younger children, and one of the children ended up shooting a sibling because the fire, and thankfully the child survived. But again, you know, you brought up the medical care that it takes. And I think about these folks who are victims of firearm violence. And I think even specifically of Jennifer Longden, who's one of our state representatives. You know, she was a victim of road rage, and you know, she went back, she lost her job, she went bankrupt because she lost her job. She no longer had insurance, like, and now she's paralyzed from the waist down. Like her earning potential, her ability, you know, she can't just travel the way that, you know, we all can travel without a thought or a care in the world. I mean, it's a lifelong medical condition for some of these folks, and it's certainly a lifelong, you know, mental health stressor for sure.
Yeah. And this is why those tertiary prevention type strategies are so important, because it doesn't end right. It doesn't end after the victimization or the death. But I noticed here, somebody did ask, are gun buyback programs effective? The research on gun buyback programs have not shown an effect on it. They look good, like, oh, look, we're doing something, but and my thing is, like, they're better than nothing. But what the research has generally found is that they are not effective. And the reason that they're not effective is because people who utilize these gun buyback programs are people that are just going to go and generally turn in their old guns. These are not guns that are going to be used in the illegal markets, if you recall, which is weird because Arizona is a constitutional carry state, so that's very limited in how you define that. But they have not been shown to have the effect that we wish they would. So that was that one question. And in terms of, I'm not sure what exactly would, could you speak more about the rates of suicide in rural versus urban areas? I'm not sure what to speak on there. We know that and I don't study suicide. I do know that when you start looking in geographic areas and what areas are affected more by the type of violence, you see differences where places like in rural communities, you're going to get higher rates of suicide versus in urban communities, you're going to get higher rates of community type violence. So it's, but in terms of the breakdown and the nitty gritty, unfortunately, I can't speak a lot about that because suicide is not my area of research. Okay. And those were some of the other questions. I don't know if there's any other questions that you want me to cover.
Well, I mean, John is asking, did you mention improving mental health services? Most mass shooters have mental health issues. Have you?
Actually, that is, I don't want to call it a myth, but that is what we find. Mental health services are just tangential. If you want to actually do something about mass shootings, you need to things that target domestic violence batterers are more promising. We know that, like I said before, with most of your mass casualty deaths, they're going to be familicide. But moreover, when you look at the mass shooters that get a lot of media attention, and with some of the most tragic events, there's usually a connection. And there is an actual study on this, and I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but what they found is a history of domestic violence and family violence within their house. So something that might be more effective will be things like those DVROs and things as restricting firearms from people who are convicted of a misdemeanor or a felony domestic violence offense. But this whole thing, we always, throw things at mental illness. The reality is this: the bulk of Americans who have there's millions of people with mental illnesses in this country, and the bulk of them live a law-abiding life. So I always get a little bit when it comes to that, because we need to understand that the bulk of individuals that do have a mental illness or a mood disorder don't commit crime. So yes, it's good to provide counseling and those primary prevention tactics like conflict resolution, and but instead of mental illness treatment, how about we try to enforce things like extreme risk protection orders? So for people who have shown red flags, we have a history of suicide ideation or violence ideation, can't get their hands on a firearm, or domestic violence DVRO, or just restricting individuals who have some of these proclivities and that have shown it in actions like domestic violence. And that's my long-winded answer to that question, because it's something that I hear a lot, but there's actually other things that we should be talking about that can be more effective.
Right. And there's a discussion happening here too. And it, because it's like Mars is asking, why don't women kill more people? And then there's a little debate going on. And I know that you're not here to pontificate about who's more violent when it comes to men and women, but I mean, we have, like, for our audience, we talk about toxic masculinity a lot. And as Diane says, men are raised to be violent, like suck it up, put some salt in it, wipe your tears away. Like little boys are programmed at a very early age that they need to be manly, and being manly means you don't show emotions, while women are, revered for being emotional and nurturing and all that kind of stuff. So we're not going to talk about that with you, but we could probably talk about that in detail next week.
But I do want to point this out, right? So and that's another lecture on like criminality and gender, right? But in terms of what we know, so in domestic violence, so let's take it in the context of intimate partner homicides. When women kill, right? Unlike, you're more likely, when women kill, you're more likely to see women kill either their partner or their children. And there's usually things like, I forget now, after postpartum issues but when they kill their partners, we know that the bulk of the time when a woman killed their partner, these women, I think approximately 75% were abused by that partner.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me take you on a bigger trend. The bigger trend is like, so even though incidents of intimate partner homicide have steadily been increasing in the past 10 years, overall, there's one type of incident of intimate partner homicide that has decreased, and that's intimate partner homicides perpetrated by women. The hypothesis here, and what the research generally has shown, is that the reason these numbers of women killing their abusive partners have decreased is because we have made it easier for women to leave these abusive relationships. We are now paying more attention, providing more safe shelters, providing better counseling, providing better risk assessment tools for women to use, that, where you work with a social service provider that tells them like, look, this guy's going to kill you kind of thing, with things like the lethality assessment program. So I just thought that was an interesting distinction to make. In terms of the dynamics of why women commit less crime, that could be, again, there's actually courses in ASU that go an entire 15 weeks with just discussing the differences between the genders. So that's definitely a different conversation, and you could do like your next like 5-part series on the differences in criminality between women and men.
Yeah, well, and Diane points out too, women on average who kill a partner or husband get an average of 20 years in prison. Men on average who kill a partner or husband get 5 years. It's 90% of women who kill who are abused by a partner. So let's see. She also brought something else up. Diane did. There is this Supreme Court case that is coming up too, about, allowing for domestic violence perpetrators to be able to own guns. And because of the Supreme Court, and Diane says it's starting Monday.
Well, I don't know if it's the same case, but it's Rahimi. So the case here is the domestic violence restraining order. So what generally happens is that if you have a domestic violence restraining order, the individual that restraining order is against gets their Second Amendment right temporarily suspended until this case here is in court. So what this means is that a person that's under a domestic violence restraining order cannot have a gun, right? And this is part of the federal mandate. Back in June, the 5th District of the United States, the 5th District Court said that this was unconstitutional. They revisited the gun part. And now that's the case that I talked about. That's the only case I know of that's going to the Supreme Court, which is, I thought it was November, but here we are, it's almost October. So maybe I have my dates wrong. But yeah, so they're gonna determine if a person under domestic violence restraining order can have a gun or not.
Let's see, Mars, I keep hearing folks say that they are afraid to be publicly secular atheists for fear of violence. How real is this risk? I don't know if Jesenia could answer that one for us necessarily.
I don't know that one.
But I'll tell you what, attending so many of these various school board meetings and people who typically, and again, we're not really talking about Christians here, but the folks that are, Christian nationalists who lead and say, I'm a Christian, but then the very next thing they say is, but I want to, abolish your existence kind of thing. So,
oh my God,
it's a very interesting thing. And they oftentimes will use Bible scripture as a way to say that all non-Christians need to be eradicated. So I guess it depends on where you hang out, Mars. Just don't go to the Peoria Unified School Board meeting because you never know what'll happen. But anyway, I don't see any more questions. Oh, she says, I just mean the court is starting Monday, not that specific date.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. So the Supreme Court starts its session. Yeah. So they are, and I always tell people like things could change dramatically in November, but we'll see where the Supreme Court lands on this case.
Oh boy. Well, I kind of have a feeling and I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad that you were able to join us today because, this really lays the groundwork for us in our discussions going forward, as we do talk to the Reverend next week and all that kind of, yeah, you do need to make a trip to PUSD. We'll make it a party, Matt. It'll be super fun. You could be my designated driver because maybe next time I will actually bring a flask. Just kidding. I won't bring a flask. But this really kind of helps us have a fundamental understanding of what's going on in the state of Arizona. So I just appreciate you so much. And I think about you doing this kind of research all the time, and these are not shiny, happy feelings that you get, this is not rainbow sunshine, the work that you do. So how do you find hope in this kind of research, and how do you find hope in going forward each day?
I mean, I think there's been progress, right? So it's hard. And I always tell when I train, I currently have a multi-state study that we're examining intimate partner homicides across 6 states. And I always tell my research assistants in their hiring interview, there's never a happy ending in any of these. There's always, most likely, it's always going to end with a woman dead, right? With a woman and their children dead. And I say most likely it's 9, about 7 out of 10, it's going to be a woman. And it's hard to be optimistic when you see so much ugly, but at the same time, I see some of the movement and the things that have happened the past 15 years, right? For the first time, like, what was it, in 2020, for the first time in 25 years, the CDC actually started funding back the research on firearm harms. We now see, we started a society. We see the youth be mobilized, and I think the youth are so important, right? Because they're the ones, we're getting old. Well, speaking for myself, like, I'm getting old, right? So seeing these young people, and you're gonna have Maya Zuckerberg talk in the next couple of weeks about the movement with the young people, that makes me hopeful, because perhaps we are not going to see it now, but these youth are going to keep on growing, right? And eventually they're going to get to vote, and hopefully they're going to be making informed decisions that are going to help us deal with some of these big social problems. So it makes me hopeful to see what the young people are doing.
You know what? I feel like whenever I ask people, like, how do they find hope? It's usually Gen Z that they bring up, and you're probably surrounded by them all the time.
Yes, I am. They keep me, I'm like getting older, but they all stay always young, right? And just they give you the energy. But I'm hopeful that we're going to start seeing changes, and progress takes time.
Yeah.
We're better than we were, in terms of this as a science and the examination of firearm harms and the attention of it. We're better than we were 20 years ago.
Well, and, seeing what happened in the Tennessee legislature with regards to gun violence in various places throughout the country, the Students March for Our Lives throughout the country that happen all over in every city. Yesterday, there was a climate action thing that happened in Kevin McCarthy's office, where a bunch of kids, including one of our youngest school board members from Arizona, were protesting in Kevin McCarthy's office and got arrested. So like these kids aren't sitting down and being quiet. And it's like, I just have to remember that, that this is cyclical. And back in the 60s, when everybody thought everything was the end of the world, or, with Nixon, everybody, we're just a bunch of apes hurtling on a rock through space. So there's going to be ups and downs, and I'm looking forward to more ups. So thank you so much, Jesenia, for joining us today. I appreciate you and the work that you do so much. Go Sun Devils.
Yes.
And I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Wonderful. Have a good day, everyone. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye, everybody.